Okay. We are here together, and I want to introduce who's joining me today. First of all, I want to say thank you for joining me for the conversation that we're going to share. And this is a podcast that I've named At Home. It's a Terra Wellness production dedicated to offering inspirations for vibrant living, because why would we want to live and not be vibrant? Right? If you're going to live, make it vibrant.
Let me
Enjoy.
think about that.
And I want to start first. I want to just introduce that this is Eric Adler with me, who's founder and managing director of One Season Regeneration, dedicated to regenerative work with soils. And as a career, he was an IT consultant for 20 years, but he has a master's in agriculture science with an emphasis in grassland ecology. And for many years, I know Eric, I know you personally enough to know that you chose going into deep immersion in nature many times as a way to renew yourself when you needed regenerative time after being in the tech world so much in those moments during the day. So it seems only natural to me that now your next steps in your own evolution has been to go deeper into the understandings and the passions of being in nature and where that can take you. So I also want to recognize that in you got really inspired by the works of Alan Savory many years ago, and you studied with him for many years. And then in most recent times, you've been learning from Dr. Elaine Ingham, who is here with us, which is an honor that it's both Eric and Dr. Elaine Ingham. Thank you. And so now I'm going to introduce you, Elaine. And say that Dr. Elaine Ingham is the microbiologist best known for uncovering the soil food web nearly 4 decades ago. You're recognized as the world's foremost soil biologist. And I know you are passionate about empowering people to bring the soils in their communities back to life in a way that's practical and personal, I would imagine, from what I've read about you. And Dr. Elaine Soil's food web approach has been used to successfully restore the ecological functions of soils on more than 5 million acres of farmland all over the world. The courses offered by your Soil Food Web School have been designed for people with or without a science background, making them accessible to individuals who wish to learn and to begin a meaningful and impactful career in an area that will help to secure the survival of humans and other species. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.
Somebody's got to do it.
Right?
Yep. So we're definitely going in the wrong direction as a species. We're kind of setting the deadline for our own destruction. So would we like to pay attention to what we're doing and reverse course really fast? Because there's just not that many years left. And there is a threshold over
Yeah.
which we cannot return. And
What
so
do you have a sense of that threshold? When how do you view that?
it's when we really start seeing loss of different ecosystems,
Yeah.
bioregions, and we lose all of the genetic material of the organisms that were unique to that bioregion, and we have severely reduced the sets of organisms that you find throughout most of the United States. We are the worst at hammering and destroying.
Would you say the worst on the planet? Because I know you've been all over the planet with
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, because we're more mechanized, we can afford to buy the really toxic chemicals. People in third world countries, they can't. They sometimes get lured to on the basis of getting free toxic chemicals from their government,
Mm.
and they'll try it out, and then they end up committing suicide because
Mm.
they're no longer able to grow the plants because they can't afford the toxic chemicals, which have destroyed all the life in their soil, and so their crop fails. And so what are you supposed to do? You've failed your family, you've failed your country, you know um, suicide is a pretty common thing when you start having that belief, that understanding of what you've done.
What you just said is so important to me because you're tying in the fact that this is something that affects mental health. It affects our biology. It affects so many layers of what's going on the planet.
Yeah, because the basis of life on this planet really starts in the soil.
Right.
And if you turn your soil into dirt, you have no life. And if we do that everywhere on the planet, Well, Mother Nature doesn't need us. We need Mother Nature. She's like, I gave you your chance, guys. Too bad. Bye. Remember those dinosaurs that used to roam the earth? What did
Yeah.
Mother Nature do to them? It would be nice to know how they managed to piss off Mother Nature quite that badly. But we're going down the same path.
Oh, now you're going to get my son really interested in this podcast because he wants to know anything you can tell him about dinosaurs. Forget about what we're doing right now, but tell me anything about dinosaurs.
Yeah.
um, Okay. I have a question for you because, when I look at words and things that I want to know more about, I often will look up the meanings where they come from. And I looked up the word ecology, just curious about it. And what I found is in 1866, the young German marine biologist Ernst Haeckel, I hope I say his name respectfully, coined the word ecology. And it came from the Greek oikos, which means house, and logia, or the study of.
Yep.
So it's talking about the study of the relationship between organisms in the house of life. And I just liked that definition so much, the study of the relationship of organisms in the house of life. So if we are looking at ecology, maybe with some of that perspective, I also want to add in your personal take of what is the definition of ecology as a microbiologist? And this is for you too, Eric, hopefully both of you.
Well, we have to include the microorganisms in the soil if we're really going to study the house. It's kind of, if you thought of ecology as being a house, this planet called Earth is this house. And if you ignored all of the microorganisms happily decomposing the foundations of that house, if we paid no attention to the termites or the ants or all the critters that live in the ceiling or that come and join you at the table for dinner, if we ignored all of that, that's kind of what we've been doing with ourselves. We don't need to know about the invisible organisms. Well, they lack in size when they make up for that by having billions and billions of those organisms in very small volumes. You can
Mhm.
very easily have 7 or 8 billion bacteria in a square centimeter of water or food resource. So they make up in number what they lack in size.
So what
And
I'm
people,
hearing you say is we may not see them, we may not realize what role they're playing, but boy, we better pay attention because there's so many of them. Yeah?
hmm
Yeah.
and before I started working on microorganisms in the soil, um, no one really had an idea what those organisms did. There wasn't a functional understanding. They were all into the taxonomy. Where do we stick, this E. coli, or where does is this should be really a Shigella? We should really call this by this other new genus name because look at the characteristics they have in different that are different. And they didn't pay attention to function. They didn't classify things on the basis of here's another one that's causing diseases. Here's another one that is killing our plants and killing us. And where does it belong? It's kind of like the whole question of virus gets to be that kind of black box because we still don't have a really good way to predict what a virus is going to do
Right.
when most of the time it's not active. It's not doing anything. Basically, all its really function is as food for bacteria and maybe protozoa and nematodes. But what else does it do? Nature doesn't just have these organisms in the soil or on your surfaces or on plant surfaces, on the surfaces of everything on this planet. They're not just sort of there because they're cute. They're there for a reason. There's a purpose. Well, we need to figure out that purpose, or we're going to be confronting Mother Nature. We're going to, again, be saying, no, 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 here's how you do it. You got to listen to us human beings because this is how the world works. And Mother Nature's sitting there laughing at us,
Yeah.
going, go ahead.
Yeah.
Do your worst. Guess
I'll show
who's
you
winning?
how it works. Right.
We with the Green Revolution, we won a battle with Mother Nature. The war has just begun.
Now, what does that mean to you? The battle or the war.
When you can fight a battle, you could win
Mhm.
20 battles, but when you get down to the final confrontation, who's walking out of that conflict
Right.
winning the war?
Yeah,
Well, it's going to be Mother Nature every time. Just
absolutely.
because we win a few little battles here and there. I wiped out all of that wireworm. I wiped out all of the rhizoctonia. I got rid of all of this disease. Well, yeah, but how about tomorrow?
Mhm.
She's going to be right back. Something else is going to be attacking your plant. And so we need to understand how things work in the
Seems to
real
me
world.
seems to me war is not the answer, and I say that so many ways right now on this planet. But if that's the case, we have to figure out how to be in relationship in very different ways than we have been, right?
Yep. Yep. So, you don't want to be fighting Mother Nature because she's going to win. So, what do? You do things in conjunction with Mother Nature. You work with, you figure out how nature manages to take the nutrients that are in your sand, silts, clays, rocks, and pebbles in a not plant available form. How does she convert those nutrients into plant available forms?
Mhm.
And it is so simple, it is so easy, and yet it's elegant. It's the way science should be done, where you figure out the steps in that process. And at the end of figuring it out, and your plant now has all of the nutrients it needs, all properly balanced every second of every day, that plant is getting the nutrients it requires in a plant available form. You just kind of sit back and go, wow, I would never have put it together that simply, that cleverly. But let me bow, to the fact that nature's got it, got the way figured out. It only took her 4 billion years to get here. And so in the course of the last 4 billion years, I think she's had the time to figure out what works best in the most elegant fashion.
So there might be some wisdom in there somehow over the
Yeah,
years.
she's not stupid. She's not, as a human analogy, you shouldn't be walking up to this little woman and patting her on the head and saying, "That's okay. Run up to the kitchen. You and Martha can have some tea. Us men are going to go out and take soil samples." It's, the way I got treated in Georgia when I started trying to tell Georgia rednecks what was wrong with the agricultural practices that they were using. It was definitely little woman, run along. You can't possibly understand how agriculture works.
Have you encountered that attitude with other countries you've worked with as much as the United States?
Yes, absolutely. It's, women in agriculture have always kind of been put down as you just follow my orders,
Mhm.
not that you're figuring this out and doing it better. So I think that that's been what the trend has been.
Yeah, and I
Um,
love that you're helping that trend change. I know you are. It's wonderful. I wanna make sure I hear from Eric too, because, Eric, knowing you is what inspired me to wanna, meet both of you in this way. So what would you say or wanna add to about your perspective of the definition of ecology, or what you maybe what has drawn you into it more deeply?
Hmm. Well, I really love his definition. Like the way I internalize ecology, um, it's the study of where life lives. And so you study the habitat and you study the life. And I often think about ecology in the way that photosynthesis is the foundation of almost all life on the planet. I understand there's a few organisms that don't require it, but I'm not sure about that.
there's a
And that,
bunch.
yeah,
There's a large number, but
a
they
lot.
live down at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, that's what I heard, but I didn't know how many they were, and I didn't know if somehow those consume organisms that break down or something that begin from photosynthesis, but I've heard they don't. But
It's hard to tell because
yeah,
where did those nutrients coming from a deep thermal fissure,
right,
where were they before they were in this deep fissure?
right.
I don't think any of us have a clue.
Yeah.
So, You know, if you don't have data, you can have a lot of fun speculating.
And we have to be so careful with our language about it too. So, and by the way, who knows what importance these organisms have on the rest of the ecology? And usually organisms are around because they're providing some sort of benefit in the flow of life.
Mm-hmm.
So you remove an organism, and there's always some sort of reaction that's felt, and normally it's highly detrimental. Every organism, including the ones we don't like mosquitoes, they have their place. Ants, they all have their place.
Yeah, what are the birds going to eat if there are no mosquitoes?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
And
as you're
ants too, I understand. So it's like, go ahead, Tara. Sorry.
Well, you've both spoken about a few things that made me wanted to ask more questions. And one of them is, I know from talking with you, Eric, in the past, that a big focus of with soil is the balance of bacterias and fungi. I like to call them fungi. I can't help it. Maybe it's because I have an 8-year-old, but nah, it's probably because the 8-year-old's alive in me. But so when we talk about this, I've also wondered about what about viruses and parasites, or to what degree do you acknowledge that in the realm of soil understanding?
it kind of, when we're putting together models, there's always this problem of where do you put the parasites? Well, and I really kind of think of virus in most instances as, or at least half of the different species are disease-causing organisms,
Mhm.
and so they are like predators, but they don't consume the whole organism. They get on board and do their thing in kind of a sneaky, underhanded way. You don't really realize you're dying until, oh, guess what infection I've got. So it's hard to place them and put the proper flows from organism group to organism group. Or if you're looking at an ecosystem from a chemical point of view and you've got box and arrow diagrams of what that flow is from box to box, how much of that is from these groups of organisms that are not really well assessed, how much damage is done. So if we had a bacterium that was chock full of nutrients and a virus attacked it, or some other kind of parasite attacked it, how much of that nitrogen and phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, etc., all of those different nutrients, how much of those are going to be released? How much of it is just going to be held in the body of the parasite organism? And we don't, at least as far as I'm aware, in soil, we don't have data on those sorts of things. We barely have any data about those nutrient flows when we're looking at beneficial organisms.
Well, as you're speaking about this, I'm thinking of some of my teachers who, are more in the world of healthcare. And, we're always looking at the balances of bacteria and fungi and parasites and viruses and things that are living naturally in our bodies, but only become an issue when it's out of balance in the relationships, right? Or if the pH is off and it's providing an environment that's making it suitable for them to over proliferate, right? Leading to inflammation and leading to issues. That's something I'm very aware of on a daily basis, because I'm working with people constantly and assessing it in different ways, because I work with East-West medicine. So in the world of what I do, I look at their tongue, I read their pulses, I'm touching their skin, looking at everything, and doing lab work, Western lab work, and checking it from different angles and philosophies and perspectives, because Western lab work misses it sometimes. And Eastern perspective doesn't always catch the level that it's become, unless I do lab work. So it's I would try to draw from different sources and learn from that. But I have to say, I'm really fascinated about all of your work with the soils, because I'm certain that the imbalances in these soils have to be impacting the biome of our guts in a huge way. And when you say the United States has these enormous problems more than other parts of the world, we're seeing that being reflected in the medical issues in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree very much because we've helped to get rid of already um, those problem diseases that take out large numbers of the population. So now we're down to cancers, and that's what we're focusing a lot of time and effort on, different kinds of cancers and how they got there, and what's causing them to win over your body's own immune system. And then suddenly we discover that we're lacking in almost all of the nutrients. We don't have those nutrients at the levels we should have them, even though we're pouring vitamin pills through our bodies, like, just unbelievable. I eat a vitamin B pill, and no more than 20 minutes later, it's all coming out in my urine. What good
Right.
did that do me? Um, because I didn't have those microorganisms in my digestive system to allow the uptake of those mineral nutrients that, yeah, you chow them down, go right through. How do you get them inside? Well, that requires the right sets of organisms. Where do you get those right set of organisms? You're going to take a pill every day for the rest of your life and cross your fingers and hope you're eating the right organism to help escort these nutrients across your cell wall and your digestive system. You're
Well,
supposed to grow these guys in your digestive system. They're supposed to be present. Um, where do we get them from? From the surfaces of the foods that we're eating. You need to eat apples that have not been, waxed
yeah.
and preventing all the right organisms from being there. You don't want to be chlorinating them. You don't want to be putting them into a bag and add nitrous oxide so nothing will decompose because there's no oxygen in the system. Well, gall darn, those anaerobic bacteria and fungi just love those conditions.
Mm.
So we're getting the wrong inoculum into our digestive system. How do you fix that? Then that means you've got to go back to the soil and make certain that the soil has the microorganisms in it that are beneficial. You've got to make certain the conditions remain promoting the
Mhm.
growth of those beneficial organisms. So who are all of those organisms, and how exactly do you keep things aerobic? How do you not let compaction happen? Just this whole slew of problems. And so we have to learn what these organisms do. If you get
I know this is such a huge topic. We could spend days and years, but can you say in a few simple terms, what are some key things that people need to consider? Like if they're going to start gardening on their own, or I know this is your whole program where you teach people. And I know, Eric, when I visited you as a friend in Santa Barbara, you're having all these experiments going on in your backyard and in your kitchen. And it's fabulous. My mentor is that way too. He's growing his own sprouts because sprouts are so important, right? Certain kinds of them, or nuts. We're talking about the value of nuts lately and the minerals you get from certain nuts versus other nuts and how important they are. Can you speak to this? Like, what are some practical things people can be thinking about?
Well, you really want to get a microscope if you possibly can, or have somebody close by that is using the microscope and knows what they need to look for, because you've got to have all of these balances of all these nutrients depending on the plant that you want to grow. Not really hard to learn all of these things, but it does take a little time, because what you want to do is collect materials that have not been sprayed with toxic chemicals. They have not had inorganic fertilizers put on them, because all of those things just wipe out all of that beneficial set of microorganisms and selects for the disease causers.
Mhm.
If when you put out that lime or the gypsum or the nitrate fertilizer, don't you hear those billions of voices coming from from your soil going, ah, and then another deeper voice going, ha, 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 ha. We've got you now. Gonna be a nummy dish for dinner. And the
Well,
bad guys win. So how
mm,
do you prevent that? You've got to get these beneficial organisms back in, and you've got to let them do their job. They
so
are the organisms that will
I
build structure.
I know Eric is involved in some gardens that are pretty spectacular in Santa Barbara, and Santa Barbara is known for special gardens, and California is in some. And I know there's a lot going on with toxic issues too. But Eric, you even told me recently that even the most spectacular garden in town that you're a part of, you did put some stuff under the microscope, and you saw that even in that garden, this precious, delicious, organic, amazing garden where they love it and they pray over the soils, there was a lack of nutrients. Yeah, can you talk about this?
Well, I was analyzing for the soil life that was present, because
Okay.
the soil life that delivers the nutrients to the plants. The plants feed the microorganisms, and the microorganisms deliver nutrients to the plants. And in these soils of this garden that we both had been working in for quite some time, yeah, there was nothing. It was dirt. It was dirt. Their whole property was covered in wood chips, and all of these gardening practices that have been around for a long time were not producing the results that I would have imagined. And it speaks to this idea, by the way, of how it's very challenging for new information to come in.
Mm.
We very easily stick to old information that doesn't work, and yet new information doesn't seem to move through our learning models. And so we stick with ideas that don't work.
Well, I know there's a human tendency to get caught up in habits and rituals and patterns, right? If something's familiar, it's like an old friend.
Right.
And some of what you're saying, though, Elaine, is ancient old knowledge, right? It's not, I mean, we've talked even, Eric, about ancient civilizations that completely disappeared, and we said dinosaurs, but we're talking about human cultures as well on the planet, that societies that are gone because of incorrect farming practices that just weren't suitable for that part of the world or at all. So
in that vein, by the way, agricultural practices have killed off more people and more civilizations than war by far.
Than war. Yeah.
Than war by far. It's
you can go through and you can read David Montgomery's book about what has brought all of the civilizations before us destroyed themselves.
Right.
Because they destroyed the soil and they weren't getting nutrition. And if everybody's sick, you're going to leave. Especially back when when they had no way of dealing with that disease. The only way to save yourself and your family was to exit, and you went someplace else and learned their methodology. So it's a tragedy that's been repeated time and time again, which just says something about the inability of human beings to break out of a pattern, to say, oops, that didn't work over there, so why do we think it's going to work over here?
Right.
But they sooner or later salted all their soil in one way or another. If you're using fish as a fertilizer and you're getting them out of salty water, you just slap that fish into the soil right where you're going to plant whatever plant, leave the seed in there with the fish, cover it up. You're increasing that salt load. And within a couple 100 years, you can't grow anything but desert in that place. So you think of all of the Middle East, the Mesopotamia, the Euphrates River Valley, Egypt, all of those countries in that area. Once they were the breadbasket of the world, they produced more than any other areas near them. And yet, look at them today. What happened?
They're not natural deserts.
No.
Well, I remember I've spent time in Egypt several times in my life. I'm pretty captivated with that culture and the ancient cultures of that area. And I remember standing in Cleopatra's Lake, gone, nothing. And realizing as I learned about the cultures, how much there was all this water and there's, so much going on that is so wiped out and it's just dust now.
And today it's hard to go backwards, because it takes some very special things to happen that we ought to be out there doing these things to bring the fertility of that soil back. And it's all about biology. You can't do it by putting on inorganic fertilizers or toxic chemicals. Human beings have this tendency to nuke everything.
Yes, including our bodies.
Yeah.
Medicine has a lot of that in it, where when we have a problem in our body, we look to sterilize our body. I mean, chemotherapy is the idea that they hope they kill the cancer before they kill the patient.
That's right.
2 or 3 seconds before they wipe out the patient, so you've got a chance to get rehabilitate them.
I do want to dovetail something here, which I think is critical that people understand, which is that we can begin to turn this around the moment we decide to. Like habitat deterioration ends the moment the management changes towards regenerating it. And it happens within the split second. I mean, the biggest time period will happen between the end of the dry season to the end of the rainy season. That's when you'll see the biggest shift. But it's so important for people to understand that these problems that we have, like fire, like the mega fires that are happening in California and in Oregon, all of this stuff can shift, and all of these problems can be solved within a very short period of time once the management changes. And the way that we describe these problems is if we're victims to them, like climate change is the cause of the fires. Well, climate change exacerbates the fires, but we can if we treat the cause of the problem, then fire season goes away. And if we treat the cause of the problem in these areas, like in Egypt, in the deserts, then we can heal these areas. And I'd like to just add that if we were to merge the work of Elaine Ingham with Alan Savory together, like we would not only regenerate habitats, but we would regenerate economies.
I want to ask you about that, Elaine. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but you keep bringing up Alan, and I was about to as well, because I'm sure you're familiar with his work, given that you're colleagues in your realm. Yeah. You mentioned the issues of putting the fish and the salt water into the soils and how it can kill off future regeneration. What about Alan Savory's work, which I know involves working more with animals in a more free grazing way? What would you say about that?
Well, I think he's, with the time that he worked and observed, he's observed some very true things, that you can't have the animals captured and held in a grassland, a field, and not think about their impact on all that biology in the soil. So you've got to limit it. How do you know that it's time to move your animals on to the next area that they graze and let this first area recover? And you have to learn what's going on with the biology, so that biology can give you the warning that things are starting to go south. We're starting to see compaction. So you start to see these organisms with very unique sizes and shapes and the way they move. So the instant you start seeing more than 1 or 2 of those on a slide of a 1 drop of soil solution from your soil, it's time to move your animals on. It's the first warning. It is the most definitively clear warning that, yep, move them on. And so move them off, and that's, all the fencing and stuff that goes with it, but it's not that expensive to buy electrical fencing. Cows and sheep and goats and such learn those facts pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So you can very much control where the animals are going to be and how much of the food that they're going to graze, so that you keep the damage to a minimum, where the biology in the soil will very rapidly bring back the productivity that's required by those plants. So we can always be pushing for the most productive grasses relative to the animal that you are grazing on those fields. The foods that are best for sheep are not always the foods that are right for cows or for horses or your grazing animal. You need to know some of that information. So you can almost think about historically where horses developed, where they evolved. Well, those are the kinds of fields, those are the plants that you want to have in your grasslands. It's going to be different if you've got a bunch of buffalo, or if you have a bunch of cow, some other pigs, say, things like that. So, I think Alan has done a very good job of understanding grasslands, but there are lots of other ecosystems on the planet than grasslands.
Mhm.
So, we've been trying to understand them all. And actually, if you understand succession, you can see that it is the biology in the soil that has to be there first. And then these plants start to grow. And
Mhm.
because those plants are now growing, there's a different set of food resources, which allows for other bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, etc., to come in and start to cycle nutrients in a slightly different way with slightly different food resources, getting some balance on to get rid of weeds. No more weeds. You don't need to use herbicides ever. So now you're going to grow a different set of microorganisms in the soil, which ultimately means you get a whole different community of plants. And they're putting all this stuff back into the soil, changing the biology, and that biology now allows for the growth of something else. So you go through succession. You start at bare soil. Now you've got grasses. Now you've got highly productive vegetables, things like that, row crops. And then you've got shrubs and deciduous trees, and then conifers and old growth forests. That will happen everywhere on the planet, regardless of the rainfall, regardless of some of the other things that we think are so important. Um, Not necessarily so. Just give it time without disturbance. Well, how much do human beings manage to leave the agricultural land alone and let it become undisturbed so we can get this biology back into the system?
Well, if we can't leave it all undisturbed, is there a way to cycle through certain things for a certain amount of years of undisturbed?
Well, we should, and every crop that we grow and every food that we care about, you don't need to be disturbing them. You should
Oh,
never have to till, never.
wow.
So that's been a huge mistake of human beings. How do you make agriculture easier? Well, tilling. Okay, you till and you flatten everything out and you make things nice and even, but it doesn't take long before the life in the soil has been pretty much destroyed. And now you're not going to be growing any kind of crop for a long time until you allow that recovery to occur. So the Green Revolution, where we went from um, tilling once a year, when you're somebody growing plants on a property and you are pushing that plowshare down into the ground and you've got to keep those oxen or horses or mules pulling that plowshare in a straight line,
Mhm.
you can't till much. You're only, if you had a 40-acre farm, not a hectare farm, not 40-acre farm, that's about as much as one human being can manage and be able to do all the jobs that have to be done. So you didn't till every day. You didn't come in and disturb the soil. Well, there are some agricultural companies that I work with. They're applying toxic chemical of some kind. They're tilling the soil in some way at least twice a week.
Mhm.
How can we support this group of microorganisms that needs no disturbance in order to function properly if we're tilling twice a day in some instances? I've sat and watched people with organic farms out there, and they bring their big tillage equipment and they go back and forth across the field this way. And
Mhm.
then when they're done with that, they turn around and they go back and forth across the field this way. And then they turn around and they go across the field in a diagonal. What's the biology left in the soil after you are finished with that practice?
What would you recommend instead? You said it a bit, but I want to hear it recapped.
Yeah, I say, for the last time ever, you're going to till
Mhm.
when you put in your first application of this really good biology. So we make compost, and really I've been thinking about changing the whole name of it because we get into trouble because people think that compost is toxic, it'll kill your plants. Well, no, not if you manage your compost correctly. So do we need to call it the soil food web circus? And we're going to put that into your soil as an inoculum, and you till that in one last time so you get that inoculum of really good beneficial aerobic organisms into the soil as deep as it goes. And from that time on, you will never till that soil again. We want to put out seeds of perennial plants that, in the case of short, low-growing vegetables, you're going to have short, low-growing cover plants. If you're growing, 12-foot tall Sudan grass, well, you can have the cover plants be a little bit taller than that. You're growing old-growth sequoias, or you're going to put in orchards of mangoes or whatever. You can have 6-inch understory plants, but they protect your soil surface from compaction because the water drops falling from the sky hit the leaves of those understory plants, and all of that energy is absorbed by that plant. Whereas if you have nothing on the surface of your soil and a raindrop comes along and you're compacting your soil. That's quite a lot of pressure that's been released into your soil. The thing is, you don't see it compacting on the surface. You see it compacting around 4 to 6 inches deep. So then your roots started to grow down into that soil. They hit that compaction layer, and they cannot go through that compaction layer. So all their roots go out to the sides, which means they're having warfare with all of their neighbors. Anytime there's another plant within the length of the root system of that plant, they're going to be fighting each other. And who wins in that kind of fight? The weeds do. You get the biology in the system, you get these healthy plants as cover, and they're feeding all the right organisms all the way through the growing season, all the way through the fall, all the way through the winter. Maybe you have really significant winters, or maybe they're kind of, well, think about climate change. Before the pandemic, my older sister said, we don't really have snow in Minnesota anymore. It comes, we'll have an inch, maybe 2. I remember as a child where we had 12 feet of snow in one.
Amazing.
Yeah, talk about blizzards. And we had to dig out tunnels in the roads in order to drive from here to the grocery store. So we just don't get the winters like we used to have. So all your plant will stay functioning and building your soil and improving the situation for your crop plants if you've got that understory plant, and then you don't have weeds. You are going to suppress all of the diseases and pests and problems. Your plant gets all the nutrients it requires every second of every day, and therefore it will be immune. There is no disease or pest that can attack that plant if it's that healthy. So what is a healthy soil? Well, it better be a place where the plant you want to grow is going to get all the nutrients it requires every second of every day, all through the growing season. And then that plant is not going to get diseased. It's not going to have problems. You're going to have maximum yields because the only thing that limits your plant is its genetic material. So it will live up to its genetic potential. All of the nutrients that you as a human being or your animals need are in those foods. All of the biology you need in your digestive system will be on the surfaces of those plants.
Can I dovetail something onto that? Which there's a study in Elaine's program, and I read a study from someone else as well, is that she separated a herd that was sick, and was it eczema? Yeah,
facial eczema.
Yeah, which is deadly in livestock. And on one side of the pasture, they continued their normal grazing practice, but on the other side, they changed it. They healed the ecology, and the animals healed as well. And there's so much hope for humanity when we think about, if we heal the ecology, that humans will be healed as well, because there shouldn't be that much difference between the digestive system and the immune system of all mammals. And so I'm really hopeful for that type of information, to flow through.
And documenting this in every ecosystem, every major crop that anybody grows, figuring all of this out for all the different bioregions, all the different ecosystems that we try to grow plants in. So a little bit of work in front of us. It really requires everybody on the planet to be helping with this.
Yeah. Blessed be the world where everyone is an ecologist.
Yeah.
What it sounds like too is that people need to understand this so that they are making sure that politically it's happening as well, because there, of course, there's so many political decisions behind how things are being grown, that are not just about the farmers, not just about the ecologists, not just about it's largely consumer driven, I would say too. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. It's you want all the mineral nutrients for your children, for yourself, so you stay healthy. Your kids won't end up in the hospital for all of these huge, all the different things that can go wrong today when you don't have the nutrients to resist cancer in certain cells. When you're consuming toxic materials and there's nothing to decompose those toxic materials, either in your soil, well, in your dirt, you don't have those organisms that will take care of those problems. Inside your digestive system, if you do ingest some of these toxic chemicals, you better have that army of microbes ready and willing to decompose that toxic material. If you don't have those organisms, sorry, you're gonna have cancer.
You mentioned minerals and the essential balancing of minerals as part of what supports the healthy gut biome. That's what I'm hearing you say. And I've wondered about, I think a lot of people out there who are in the wellness world understand that we need more minerals. Or, one of the things I've learned a lot is how important the minerals are for supporting adrenal or endocrine balancing, period. And it's something that I come across a lot in lab work. People are low in their minerals, almost everyone I work with has adrenal imbalances at this point. So, I mean, I think about this a lot in terms of what people are eating or not eating and what to support them in making decisions about, like where to go, what to do, what to focus on the most with their food intake. I hear what you're saying about the soils needing to change. I'm also wondering if there's key things that you find, because you know so much about soil and plants or seeds or nuts, or if there's key things that you think are really important for getting essential minerals.
Um, it's having that biology. You've got to have the maximum diversity
Mhm.
of the indigenous species of bacteria that perform all these different functions. And
Mhm.
so when you think about the soil in your garden, if we're looking at a square inch of that soil, we need to have somewhere, I think it's around 10 billion bacteria, and we need at least a couple thousand species of bacteria. Then we need kind of the same thing for the fungi,
Mhm.
depending on what the balance is required for your plant. And then because it's the plant that puts out the exudates from photosynthesis, and puts out different kinds of exudates that tell which bacteria and which fungi to wake up and which enzyme they should be making in order to pull those nutrients from the silica bilayer of the sand, silts, clays, rocks, pebbles, parent material, etc., and organic matter, if you please have some. At least over 3% is what we're seeing is what you have to have. Um, and so now those bacteria and fungi are loaded down with all those great balances of the nutrients that the plant requires. So the bacteria and fungi are like the pantry. They're holding on to the nutrients for your plant until the protozoa, the nematodes, the predators come into the system. And, maybe it's some of those viruses that maybe they have a function in there. We've never tested, who knows? But those bacteria and fungi are eaten by the protozoa and the nematodes. But the nutrient content inside a bacterium or a fungus is massively greater than what those predators require. So the predators have to basically poop out all of those excess nutrients in a plant available form right there next to the root system of the plant. So, soil scientists, when they They've always told everybody, well, your plant is going to set up a diffusion gradient. And so that plant is going to cause a diffusion gradient to occur from, 5 or 10 feet away. And those nutrients will flow into the root system of the plant. Forget that. There's way too many other bacteria and fungi in between, even 10 centimeters away from the root and the root. Something else is going to grab those nutrients long before it gets back to the plant. So we have to have this, Mother Nature, quite clever. Those nutrients are released right there where the plant takes up exactly what it needs of each of the different kinds of nutrients. It's not just nitrogen, it's phosphorus, it's sulfur, it's magnesium, potassium, sodium, iron, molybdenum, all of those nutrients have to be present.
Can I ask your opinion on, I hope I say it right, shilajit? Is it a particular kind of soil? Do you know, Himalayan mountain soil, shilajit. It's something that maybe you aren't as familiar with it. It's something that I know certain companies are starting to make sure that they have some of that in their mineral tonics, or it's actually something I have in one of the tonics that I use with people. But I remember Dr. Zach Bush was talking about shilajit as well, and he has it in his products. If you've heard of him, I'm not sure. But
I know Zach.
Okay. He's getting pretty well known these days, especially during the pandemic, because he was talking so much about the soils and the role of that in virus issues, which I appreciated. I loved what he was bringing out to the open in a big way. But anyway, I know that he's selling products that have some of that. I know that a lot of people are believing it might be something that's curing something.
And it could well, especially if the minerals in that material, but they have to have a step between that mineral material, that rock formation, the silica bilayer, because your plant can't use those nutrients as is from that rock material. It's got to be some bacteria or fungi consuming that with their enzymes, pulling it inside their bodies, and then they've got to get eaten by their protozoa, by their predators. And that's what releases those nutrients in a plant available form. So great, put in some missing nutrient that's perhaps in a slightly more organic form, but your plant can't take up organic nutrients. They can only take up soluble plant available nutrients.
Now, what if someone's then having botanicals that have been created from these amazing soils that are organic, would you say taking some of those in to supplement something that isn't coming out of a lot of the food that's readily available, might be useful as they're rebuilding their gut biome potentially?
Yeah, but they need to do rebuilding of their gut biome first, because otherwise you consume these not plant available forms of nutrients and they just go right on through your digestive system.
Right.
You don't have the right organisms to do this job. You don't have the protozoa and the nematodes. And most people don't even think about the fact that they therefore have to have protozoa and nematodes in their digestive system. Most people are like, oh, no, it's supposed to be sterile. No, you are going to be sick if it is sterile. So get those organisms in there. Should we be making compost teas and drinking down the compost teas? And we have a lot of people that we make the compost for that turn that into compost tea after we check it with the microscope. That's one of the things you always want to check and make sure that you're going to consume just good organisms, none of the bad. And it's pretty easy to see the bad guys. So if you see those bad guys and you say, no, this is going to have to be rebrewed, we're going to put that water onto a compost pile at the start, because it's okay to have disease-causing organisms at the beginning of the composting process. But by the end, they need to be all taken care of. They need to be outcompeted, inhibited, and consumed by the beneficials. So tracking that in your digestive system is, well, you will always have good results. You won't have bad results if it's always the good guys that you're growing.
Now this is where I appreciate something I learned in Chinese medicine and Korean and Japanese medicine, where there's the tongue diagnosis. Tibetan medicine too goes way back thousands of years, where you're reading the tongue as a mirror reflection of the gut. What you're saying, when things are too sterile, or when people have had certain medications, most medications that are Western based, I've noticed there's tons of dampness that shows up on the tongue, thick dampness, goop, you know.
Yeah.
You can also look at tongues, and in the rear of the tongue, you can see microvilli damage. That's a reflection of the gut damage.
Yep.
And it's fascinating stuff, because I totally agree with you. The rebuilding has to happen. There's entire schools of medicine based on, balancing the earth first in the body, right?
Yep.
Which is the gut, home of the gut, so that we can actually nourish ourselves better in every way possible from there. And it makes a lot of sense. It's still a time where there's a lot of trending still. There always has been trends, right, throughout time. But it's sometimes hard to get through to, well, what is really going to make the best difference for everybody? So that's why I keep asking similar but different angles on the same questions. So
And it's hard to do testing on human beings, because who wants to sign up for the control group where you don't get something that is probably lacking, or maybe we have enough people who don't want to know, don't want to believe, and we can put them in the control treatment, except they're probably already sick. So it's not fair to make that comparison, but there has to be a lot of testing on some organism that is close to human beings. And see, then you're picking on chimpanzees. Why do they have to suffer for?
right.
How do you test this?
But it sounds like every household maybe could have their own microscope. In the future, and maybe we have ways, and hopefully everyone starts to learn how to read their own tongues.
Yeah, yeah.
And get the signs of what we do know that's readily available, and hopefully not very expensive, that can start showing us the progress and where things are evolving or not.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's going to take some clever science to figure this one out. Yep.
Eric, I didn't want to interrupt you, but please chime in.
Oh, I was just going to add that it's also, there's pressure to not test these things right now, because there's no money to be made on them. And I think it's really important that it's understood that the power of the healing of clean food, of clean water, and how easy it is to regenerate ecosystems, habitats, to get this done. And when I mean easy, like the amount of money that's spent on an election, relatively speaking, that we throw billions of dollars away, trillions, on things that don't accomplish anything, that just keep us basically at a war between Republicans and Democrats, between haves and have-nots. And all of this stuff can shift, and it makes money. It regenerates, health.
But you're taking money away from these big, huge
Yes.
agricultural companies. They're going to lose a massive amount of money. Well, could we convince them that they could be what's pushing the change? They're not going to survive.
And so they have enough money, by the way, in that they have enough money to keep our Congress people, our elected officials, our presidents, not seeing the real problem. And some people call it rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, that we're still going to hit the iceberg.
Right.
So that's, to me, like, if we can spend a moment and just seeing the bigger picture, that it's so easy to shift all of this. The hard part is the people part, not the ecology part. That part, people like Dr. Elaine and Alan Savory, they've figured out ways of regenerating habitats, and they work. They just don't follow within what the universities want to study. They don't follow what the USDA wants us to be doing.
Because they are, to a large part, in the pocket of the big chemical companies. And the chemical companies won't give the donations unless the universities do what those big corporate monstrosities want to have done, to try to prove that their product is effective.
I live in a world here in Santa Barbara where I meet people of all walks of life. And there are some people that have a lot of money here. Gosh, I think you have to be, these days, to own something here, you have to be, it's hard to own something here. It's gotten ridiculous. And then there are people that don't, and one of the things that I find though is that a lot of people that have the money just don't even know what you're saying, because depending on where you're getting your resources and information, you may not know this and know what an impact could be made and where their money could go. That could be more beneficial. I think a lot of people are focused on making sure people are just getting food, right? So then they see the benefit of backing companies that are helping to make more food. But what you're saying is it's the quality that matters so much more than even getting it.
Yeah, because you can reduce the amount of food that has to go into a person's mouth by, a factor of 5 or 6-fold. So
Wow.
now you could actually feed 6 families for the amount of nutrition in the properly produced foods that we grow. You're not going to feed just one, they're eating lots and lots and lots, but they're not getting in nutrition. So they're still hungry. They're still hungry. They're still hungry. And they consume massive amounts of material. And, they're typically usually bulging from, they're eating a lot of carbohydrate, but they're not getting the proteins that they need. They need other micronutrients, and they're not getting, but they're hungry all the time.
Then
And
there's this other piece, like you said, well, there's also these correlations between gut health and whether or not we're producing enough serotonin. Well, then you're also talking about today, the way we're destroying the soils is, I mean, you're creating major stress on land itself. That's, then we're also having stress in our bodies.
and your animals are stressed, and everything around you is stressed. So how can you avoid being stressed? So all of that's got to be resisted, and you are the person that can spread this information to all of these folks. So see, it's a really important triad that we've got going here of we all need to be doing what we do best to make certain that everybody starts understanding.
Agreed. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the work that both of you are dedicating your lives to more and more. Eric, I know you will have. And Elaine, it sounds like you've been on this path a long time. It's really, really special to get to spend time with both of you talking about it and to learn so much today. I could do this again and would love to, frankly, because we only touched on some and there's so much more. But I do want to make sure that people do find you. So please say again how they can best find you in your work and learn things that are practical tools that they can do at home.
Yeah, for me, it's go to the website, soilfoodweb.com. We have lots of information on there presented in a fashion that you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to have years and years of science education. We have like 5, 6 different cartoons that put across the information really well. And because you're seeing the diagrams of here's how a plant actually works. And it's, the flows in and back and where the microorganisms are. So it's, the very easy understanding. The pizza delivery form of getting nutrients is explained on the website. So trying to help people understand what they can do. And then we have classes called the foundation classes that we teach people the background information. And again, we try to keep it very simple language. We don't invoke a lot of chemical terminology, scientific terminology. We will teach you how to make really good compost so that none of your plants will die when you use this material, and several different ways of composting: thermal composting, worm composting, static composting, because each person has a preference based on what you do for a living. So you pick the way of composting. And we don't compost with waste material. We are going to use leftovers from your breakfast. And don't call it waste material. It's not waste yet. Until it putrefies and goes anaerobic, it's not a waste. It's good food, and you want to be making certain that you're feeding your microorganisms good food. It's not waste material. So be careful on your terminology, and then you don't get any visits from the regulatory agencies, because you're not making, a waste material. You're not using any waste material in your composting. So, and then how do you turn that into a liquid? If it can be hard to put down a solid. So you want to convert it into a liquid so you can spray it. You can run it through your sprinkler. You can run it through your irrigation system. And so compost teas and compost extracts. And then using a microscope is foundation course number 4. Those of you who want to go on and become a laboratory where you can be doing people's samples for them, and giving them those people, your clients, the rundown on what does this mean. And then we train consultants, and we have consultants that are working all over the world, and we have a good demand for more people to become consultants, especially as we're starting to interact and work with larger and larger acreages of land. We need people that will be there to help our clients do everything correctly, so they can see that within one growing season, they've increased their yields by a significant amount, which is, of course, the bottom line. The dollars are very important for people to be able to continue doing this work.
Indeed. Yeah. I want to say too that Eric, I know you've done a lot of work with Elaine at this point, and you are already having people trying to hire you left and right, because people need this, and they know they need something, especially when their crops are failing or they're not getting. I know winemakers are going through a heck of a thing right now around how to get the right soils working, let alone berry people or anyone. There are a lot of people here needing help with it, and so I'm grateful that this exists as a resource. I just want to ask on a level that's also personal to you, a human personal level, both of you. What would be your hope beyond soil itself, but what it represents, based on what it represents? What would be your hope with your work and your messages going out to everybody?
I'll let you go first, Eric, because I've been going first most of the day. So your turn.
My hope is that people expand their ability to sit with things that are uncomfortable, because right now we're not listening to one another. We're talking over one another. And the people who are very much pro the policy of like Anthony Fauci versus the people who are anti, it's a war again. And it's not like, oh, there might be ideas that are good with what both of these people are talking about. There's fighting, and neither side holds a valid opinion. And I'd like to see people with more curiosity and openness around all sorts of ideas, because without that, that's the part to me that I'd love to see expanded on. Because once that happens, anything is possible. Once people show up being open and curious and committed to learning versus closed and defensive and committed to being right, once that shifts happen, then everything changes. But until then, And now we're back to your yoga teaching, Sarah, because that's what happens when people go into yoga, is that they step out of, this fight or flight mechanism and into a meditative state, which is so important.
Truly. Thank you for that. And Elaine, what would you say?
What I would like to, well, it's quite related to what Eric just said. I'd like to see people move away from a nukem approach. When you have a disease-causing organism, you've got to run into the cabinet and grab something that's just going to kill them all. The nukem approach, because you don't know what you're killing completely. You might get rid of that disease-causing organism for a couple of days, but probably no longer than that. and you may have killed all of those organisms that were valiantly trying to bring that disease-causing organism under control, and you just wiped them out. You didn't wipe the disease out, because most of our diseases are becoming resistant to whatever chemicals we're putting out.
Mhm.
And so you're destroying the very things you have to have in order to have the plant be healthy. So no more inorganic fertilizers, no more pesticides, no more herbicides. You do not have to buy those things. And if you think about the cost of just the chemicals alone, in this last 10 days, the price tag of 1 unit of pesticide or inorganic fertilizer, when it used to cost 10 days ago $23 per unit, and now they're at $50 per unit.
Wow.
That's how much, yeah, it's inflation is going to get us. So you have to pay attention. If you want to manage healthy plants, you have to have all of this biology. If you want to keep eating, you're going to have to put the proper things back into the soil so that your plants don't need those very expensive toxic materials. Um, it's not needed. We need to do a 180% shift in direction that we're going, so that none of us will run out of food.
Mhm. And nourishment, which I see as more important than just
And
food.
just food, right? Exactly. Very, very good point.
Yeah. Thank you. Again, both of you. It's been really insightful, and I'm eager to have a different kind of relationship to my own garden, even in my backyard right now. It's just, work with it in new ways. So thank you very much.
Go out there and talk to all of the organisms, including the ones you can't see.
Well, I was born at Findhorn, so I grew up doing that anyway.
Very good.
Scotland Gardens, That said, I will. All right, everyone. I'm going to say thank you again, and we'll end it for today. And please check out the resources that I'll post with this podcast for anyone who's been listening. And may this inspire you to approach your food and your soils in a very new way. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
I'm finding my cursor. Here we go.